Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're going to take a look at a couple of different models of Finnish Mosin Nagant. Specifically, we're going to take a look at the two models that are associated with Finland's most famous sniper, and in fact the world's most successful sniper ever, Simo Häyhä. Now, we'll start with just a brief biography. Simo Häyhä was born to basically a Finnish Karelian peasant farming family in 1905. He grew up on an 80-acre, roughly, farm with livestock and forestry and some crops, together with 7 siblings, although several of them would die during their childhood and adolescence. He joined the Finnish Civil Guard at the age of 17, where he was issued a rifle just like this one. In fact, he was issued specifically a New England Westinghouse M91 Mosin Nagant. So let's take a quick look at this and let's talk about how this sort of thing found its way into Finnish military service. Simo Häyhä's first military issue rifle being American in manufacture, it may seem a little counterintuitive, but it is in fact true from his own personal account, and I think that's pretty darn cool. Russia, of course, was using the M91 Mosin Nagant. This is the original, very long rifle. These have 1910 pattern Konolev rear sights. This was not the original, very first Mosin Nagant rear sight, but it is the improved version that the Russian military had adopted and pretty universally updated all of its rifles to. We have an upper handguard on here and a very long barrel with actually a Finnish replacement taller than Russian front sight. Now, Finland had been a part of the Russian Empire until the Russian government collapsed in 1917, at which point Finland, over the course of a couple of years, would gain its independence, and it would adopt the Mosin Nagant basically out of convenience. The Russian military, the Russian government, had left basically 180,000 Mosin Nagant rifles in Finland, which the Finns took over when they declared their independence. And they didn't have the money to adopt anything brand new. The Mosin Nagant was a perfectly adequate military rifle at the time, and so that's what they went with. Now, the Russians had been making their own Mosin Nagants at several factories, but during World War I, they had a severe shortage of war material, and they contracted with 2 American companies to manufacture Mosins. I apologize that the markings on this one are a bit faint, but the companies were Remington and New England Westinghouse, which you can see there. This is a rifle that was manufactured in 1915 and sent to Russia, used by the Russians, and then ended up in Finnish service. This would have been arguably the worst of the military, the standard military bolt-action rifles used by major countries at this time period, but it's what Finland had, and so they would make the best of it. The most significant modification that the Finns did was to take the Russian sights, which are graduated in arshin, which is, an arshin's about 3/4 of a meter. It's basically a pace. And you'll see they're marked 4, 6, 8, 10, and 1200 arshins on the side of the sight. Well, the Finns would cross those out, and they would renumber them on the other side in meters. They went ahead and cut an extra step here for a 200-meter spot, and then 3, 4, this step translates over, or converts over, to 550 meters, 700, and 850. So that's an easy way to tell Finnish capture or Finnish used M91s. The Russians had simply a slot in the stock to pass a sling collar through. The Finns would install metal sling swivels, front and back here. So this oval plate fills the original stock slot cover. And then they'd be marked on the side here with a Civil Guard number, and also the SA stands for Finnish Army as a Finnish national property mark. Just a couple of years after joining the Civil Guard, Simo Häyhä was required to do his mandatory military service. Finland had universal male conscription at the time, and in fact still does. And so he would spend most of 1925 through 1927 in the Finnish Army. He served there in a series of bicycle battalions and would eventually be promoted to corporal, trained and assigned as a squad leader. And that's what he was when he was formally discharged from the Finnish Army in 1927. He then went back to his time in the Civil Guard and would continue. He went back to living at home on the farm, working as basically a peasant farmer who very much enjoyed shooting. both hunting in the forest, everything from small game and birds up to moose, and also competitive shooting on the range, where he quickly acquired a reputation as being a truly outstanding marksman. Now, as a Civil Guard member, he was issued a rifle. Probably something rather like this, possibly an M28 shortened rifle, but the Civil Guard issue rifles were kind of the second tier behind the official Army rifles. Well, the Civil Guard and the Army both had development programs to improve the Mosin Nagant. The Army developed the Model 27, the Civil Guard developed the Model 28 independently of each other. And then what was particularly important is in 1930, the Civil Guard introduced the Model 28/30. Which was an improvement of their previous Model 28s, and it was a truly magnificent rifle. This is really the best you can possibly do with a Mosin Nagant action. The improvements were made by a Finnish engineer by the name of Harry Monsner, and what came out was it was an excellent rifle, but it was an expensive rifle. And Finland is a small country. They didn't have a lot of military budget at the time, and the Civil Guard couldn't afford to just manufacture M2830s for all of its members. So they came up with a plan where if you, as a Civil Guard member, wanted to have a brand new 2830 that you could take home and keep as your personal rifle, it's still technically government property, but it's yours, you could pay a chunk of the cost of manufacturing and buying one of these rifles. The government would pick up a bit of the cost, you pay the rest, you get to take the rifle home, you get to take care of it. You're not any longer dependent on a rifle that gets stored away in a Civil Guard depot where it's probably not taken care of very well. And if you are an avid competitive shooter, this is exactly what you want to be able to do. You want to be able to learn your individual rifle perfectly. You want to learn its trigger, you want to learn its sights, you want to learn its exact zeroing, and you want to be able to take care of it properly. And Simo, along with about 30,000 other Finnish Civil Guard members, signed up for that program. And he ended up with Model 2830, serial number 60,974. Sometime in the mid-1930s. And part of what made him so successful as a sniper was the fact that he went through the entire Winter War using his own competition rifle that he knew intimately in and out. It is worth pointing out that he did not use an optically sighted rifle. A lot of people would probably assume that the world's greatest sniper probably had a pretty darn good scope. No, actually he had no scope at all, and very deliberately so. So in part, knowing your own rifle gives you a huge advantage, and just taking an off-the-rack optically sighted rifle doesn't necessarily mean everything's going to be better. Finland had very few optical sights at this time. There was a series of development programs to make a Finnish sniper rifle. They never really got into mass production in any way. There were some captured Russian sniper rifles, but not a lot of them. And frankly, Simo actually very deliberately preferred to have an iron-sighted rifle. He thought that scopes were slower to use, and recounted more than a few occasions when he was able to shoot Russian snipers before they were able to shoot him because his iron sights were faster than their scopes. He thought that the iron sights did not require you to lift your head as high up. You were able to make yourself less of a target with an iron-sighted rifle. There were no lenses to glint sunlight, which was something that led to the demise of more than a few Russian snipers who found themselves at the muzzle end of Simo's rifle. Scopes, especially at that time, had more components. They had things that could break, things that could go wrong. Scopes can fog up in weather. A lot of problems that you will never encounter with iron sights. And so for all of these different reasons, Simo Häyhä preferred an iron-sighted M2830. Now, let's take a little bit of a closer look at this one. Obviously, this isn't his, but it's within about 2,000 serial numbers of his. And I'll show you some of the other features of the design that made it a really excellent rifle, far beyond the typical, oh, it's a Mosin Nagant. This particular example is a very late production 2830. I think I said it was 2,000 away from Simo's number. It's actually 10,000 away. Sorry, I misspoke there. 1940 production. SKY is Finnish Civil Guard. The S in a gear is the logo of the Sako company that manufactured it. And of course, we have the SA, Finnish property mark. To get a better idea of exactly why these sights are so excellent, let's go over to Henry Chan from 9 Hole Reviews. He's an expert marksman who has some experience shooting the Finnish M39, which used this exact same pattern of sight.
Hi, my name is Henry. I run the channel 9 Hole Reviews with my co-host Josh, and a lot of times we take service rifles, military rifles, and push it out to distances at 500, 800 to 1100 yards, which is close to 1 kilometer, of which this particular rifle currently holds the record for iron sight rifles with the least amount of cartridges expended to reach that 500 yard and then subsequently take iron sights with the standard cartridge all the way out to 1 kilometer twice with 2 consecutive hits within a 5-shot magazine. One of the reasons why this particular rifle was so effective at that range comes down to the front and the rear sights that the Finnish had designed. Now, the front sight, you'll notice, has a thicker front sight blade than many other different rifles. The reason this is effective at a longer distance field type of scenario is that it helps a shooter estimate the windage adjustment as you push on. You could favor left and right a little more with a horizontal top at a square post. That is extremely advantageous when you're talking about a cartridge like the 7.62 53 rim, the Finnish version of the 54 rim, being a slow-traveling, high-mass projectile because it gets affected by wind a bit more, however very accurate. The rear sight is also very interesting. You'll see that on one side it has coarse adjustments for the adjustment ears to lock onto. On the other side, it has fine adjustments for the adjusting ears to lock onto. Yes, you can do fine adjustments as you step out, and at different distances, you could lob it directly into exactly where you're looking at. However, if you want to do coarse adjustments, you can also unlock both sides of the ear and then just hold down the fine adjustment side and push it up until the coarse adjustment right side of the ear locks in. This is also indicated on the left side of the rear sight base, because if you are prone in a position, instead of popping your head over to look at where your sight settings are, you can adjust the sight settings laying parallel to the rifle on the side. This is advantageous for soldiers to not poke their head up, to decrease the silhouette. And quite frankly, this type of sighting system, being able to accommodate a fine, a coarse adjustment, having a good windage adjustment without cluttering the sight's adjusting system, is extremely advantageous for the Finnish marksman. And I don't think I need any more embellishment on how effective the Finnish marksman was during the Winter War and the Continuation War. That being said, this is my personal rifle. This will likely stay with me for a long, long time, forever, hopefully. And I enjoy shooting it very, very much, especially as a field marksman, particularly because of its excellent barrel, excellent trigger, and excellent sighting system, being perfectly adequate for adjusting elevation and windage without being too complicated to where it would take too long to figure out how to use.
Thanks, Henry. In addition, the rifles actually had basically free-floated barrels. It doesn't really look like it from the outside, but I have taken out the barrel band screws, and if we take off these, when I take off the handguard, you will see that there is an aluminum bushing in here. And if you look closely at the stock, the wood does not actually touch the barrel anywhere in there. So the barrel comes out here, it goes through, it goes through this aluminum bushing. This is what the front barrel band connects to, and this is what actually holds the stock and the upper handguard together. So even when these are clamped down, they're clamping around the aluminum bushing, which is slightly larger than the barrel, and it allows the stock to flex a little bit. You can put pressure on the stock without that pressure being transmitted directly to the barrel. It's not as effective of a free floating as something that we would expect in a modern day long range precision rifle, but for a standard military service rifle, this is quite impressive and very effective. In addition to free floating the barrel, they also accounted for the issues of the wood warping with changes in temperature and humidity by making the stocks out of two parts spliced together. So you can see the fingers here, where the front and the rear parts of the stock come together. And that's going to allow the rear of the stock to flex a bit more where it's less important and isolate the front end where it could affect the barrel. In addition to that, there were a few modifications made to the magazine just to sort of tweak and slightly improve its reliability over the original Russian pattern. You will find these sometimes with a variety of sling attachments. This particular one still has the Russian style of slots in the stock. You'll find them sometimes with two slots, what's called a ski trooper version, just intended to have a different sling attachment for guys who are going to spend most of their time on skis and had more comfortable ways to carry the rifles. You'll also occasionally find them with sling swivels on the bottom or on the side. There was a variety of sling attachments that were used by the Finns. Simo's own personal rifle, by the way, is lost forever. On March 6th, 1940, he was hit in the face by a Soviet exploding bullet and grievously wounded. He was in a coma for something like 6 or 7 days. His rifle was never recovered from the battlefield, or if it was recovered, it was lost at some point. There is an M2830 on display at the Karelian Jaeger Museum, which, by the way, formerly gave Simo Häyhä honorary membership to the Karelian Jaegers, which hadn't existed when he was in service, in 1978. And they put up a presentation rifle that is the same model as what he used, but it's not actually his original rifle. Anyway, Simo would go on to continue to be a competitive shooter and hunter, living a very modest, very quiet, very stereotypically Finnish lifestyle after the end of the Winter War. He attempted to re-enlist for the continuation war and was rejected on medical grounds. Not that surprising, considering he was not that far away from having spent many months in hospital recovering and some 26 surgeries to try and rebuild and repair his lower face. He's very distinctive in post-war photographs because he was clearly very permanently disfigured by that wound. But over the course of some 95 days of combat in the Winter War, he is credited with a confirmed 542 enemy soldiers killed, which is just a mind-boggling number. That averages out to more than 5 per day every day that he was in service, which sounds almost impossible. And yet the conditions of the Winter War were such that when you took someone who was such an outstanding and practiced marksman, and frankly, a very courageous individual, he put all those things together and you end up with the world's most successful sniper in history. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at the model of rifle that Simo used. If you're interested in learning more about him, I would highly recommend the book The White Sniper, written by a Finnish Defense Forces serving officer who had many years of friendship with Simo towards the end of his life. So the book is based primarily on personal interviews and interactions with Simo and also with those who are around him earlier in his life. Author is, I'm going to mispronounce this, I apologize, Tapio Saarelainen, something like that. You can find the book on Amazon. It's in English, which is very convenient for those of us who don't speak Finnish. Excellent book, and also a book oriented towards the practical marksman, military serving officers, and competitive shooters. There's a lot of very detailed information about shooting and riflery and what Simo did during the Winter War. So, highly recommend it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.